Welcome to week 5. So this week our topic is covering internal and external communications. So I decided I wanted to focus on effective communication strategies. Working in higher education, that is something that we try to do refresher courses on with our staff because they are working with families on multiple fronts, and it's always important to make sure that the people that we have working for us are communicating with our parents in the best possible way. By the end of this module, I'm hoping that you will understand the different communication types and strategies, understand the challenges to effective communication, and understand important strategies that can be applied to any situation. So before we talk about effective communication strategies, let's talk about communication types. There's verbal, which I'm doing right now. Nonverbal, which I may or may not be doing right now, but you can't tell because you can't see me. And written, which you can see I'm also using here. It's important to be fluent in all three, but if you really want to be an effective communicator, you need to take steps to try to master each of those. The graphic I put up comes from one of your readings this week, and it's having better communications at work. You can see some of the things it puts up here. Visual presentations. I'm using some visuals right now. Trainings, having open meetings, getting feedback from people, knowing your coworkers. There's a lot of different things you can do to improve how you work with your coworkers, how you communicate with both your subordinates and your superiors. And there's a lot of good information in that reading, so look forward to hearing your feedback on that one. So let's talk about some of the challenges and barriers to effective communication. So I'd say first off, the one that makes the most sense is the language barrier. If I can't speak your language and you can't speak my language, our communication skills are pretty limited. Anyone who's traveled internationally has probably used a lot of using one word very slowly, whether it's your own language or the language you're trying to speak. But you can be left using a lot of nonverbal communication to try to get certain things across if there's a language barrier. Also important, though, is culturally in different countries, one hand gesture could mean something totally different. Same thing with facial gestures or head nods. What may to you be an innocuous gesture could actually be something very offensive. Distance is another one. You know, sometimes it may be a time zone difference. I've worked with consultants who may be 8 or more hours apart from me in time zone, which can make communicating back and forth very difficult. If you're waiting on emails, you need to make sure it might be within a certain window. You may never have that face-to-face communication. Or if you do, it may be through a Skype, which can also affect the ability to communicate due to technology challenges. Expectations are another thing. With expectations, I mean that you're communicating with people, not communicating to people. It's a two-way street. You're giving, they're receiving, they're giving back. You have an active role in communication. There's questions that should be asked. You're listening, you are participating in the conversation, and using communication for problem solving and improving things. Attention is also very important. If you're speaking to someone face to face, you can usually tell if they're engaged, if they're paying attention. If they're not making eye contact and looking around, you may question if they're paying attention. Especially frustrating if you're talking to someone who's looking at a phone, they may not be paying attention. The way that you participate in the conversation, like if you are talking too much or talking over people, shows that perhaps you're not engaged in the conversation and actively listening. And also important is tone. The way you say something, saying one phrase in different tones can have a huge impact on the message that conveys. Now, I'm a huge Kids in the Hall fan, and boy, I've only got a few weeks left of my master's program, so I might as well take the chance to include the kids in the hall as part of my master's education. So I've also put, along with this video presentation, a video from a Kids in the Hall episode called The Sarcastic Guy. And you'll kind of see what I mean about tone and maybe understand that speaking in a certain manner people can take totally differently, and it may be that you're not trying to communicate in that way, but the way your tone comes off to someone else, they interpret it a certain way. So these are all important things to take into account, and next we'll talk about tools to help be a more effective communicator. Some tools to help with effective communication. First off, stop, look, and listen. And what I mean by that is stop, focus on the person you're communicating with and their thoughts and their feelings. You're looking at them, making eye contact, and also paying attention to their body language and any other nonverbal cues. And you're listening to their verbal message and trying to best understand the message they're trying to convey to you. Professionalism is about courtesy and respect. That also means you're trying to communicate with someone in a way that is not to offend, which can be very difficult sometimes. But you're actively making sure that you're not going to try to use phrases or gestures that could be construed as offensive. Professionalism has suffered the most with emails, I think. People don't put clear subject headings in the subject line. I have seen some of the most abhorrent email addresses, and people email me asking for my professional help. That one still blows my mind. I can't even say the examples because they are not professional. Social media and texting have also made writing an email a lot more difficult for people. People communicate almost in shorthand. They're not spelling words fully, like they're putting THRU instead of through. The punctuation, using too many capital letters or exclamation points, all of these things, they really just affect you being able to read and process an email without it just being too unprofessional. Being consistent in the message that you're trying to convey, and also approaching each conversation and each communication the same way. It's not only going to help you be a better communicator, but it's going to show that you're a more consistent and reliable person. Being an active listener. You're paying attention, you're showing that you're listening, you're providing feedback, you're not judging, and you're responding appropriately. Open posture refers to that your arms are not crossed, so your arms are open, your legs aren't crossed, you're looking at the person that you're engaged with. You're not turning away from someone, you're facing them directly. You lean forward and you're relaxed. All of this with open posture just makes a person more comfortable when they're communicating with you. I found this graphic online I thought you might find interesting with, the approachable body language. I know it's a little hard to see. And finally, smile. Both when you're speaking with someone face to face or over the phone, people actually can hear it. There's something in customer service and sales actually called smile and dial. And it's the idea that actually this does have a positive effect on people when you're communicating to them and you're smiling. I would say try saying something negative while you're smiling. It may come off as looking a little deranged, but it's very difficult to not feel happy while you're talking and smiling. It may feel a little unnatural at first, but you do get used to it. I have 4 interesting readings for you this week, focusing on techniques and skills for more effective communication. There are some you'll see that are focusing more on a work environment, but I was also very interested in grabbing something from the psychology side that's talking about how psychologists communicate, because sometimes you're going to see some of the best communication tips coming from the mental health side, because there's a better understanding of what drives a person, what engages a person, and I'm sure a therapist who is not an effective communicator is not a great therapist. So check these out. This will be really helpful, I think, in helping with applying to real life and also applying to the readings. And finally, I hope this week's discussion topics allow you to practice what you've learned and spur some lively conversation about the topics. What are some examples of factors that can have a negative effect on how you communicate? How has technology changed how we communicate? In what ways is this positive or negative? Of the 3 communication types, is there one or more that you think you need to develop to become a better communicator? What steps would you take to improve these? Personally, I think my weakest communication type is verbal, and it's not because I'm bad at communicating verbally. It's because I talk too much. I have attention deficit issues, and so that is something I've always struggled with. And I work on it constantly because I know it can cloud the message if I talk too much and what I'm actually trying to communicate. And it can also make it look like I'm not actively listening to the people that I'm communicating with. So that's something I try to work on, and it's always a struggle for me. So there may be one that you are weaker at, or perhaps all 3, or you may be a perfect communicator, and we'd love to hear what steps you take to be an effective communicator. I hope that this gives you a great week to talk about communication, and we will talk in week 6.